Hey guys, welcome back to Joko Yo. And here we are getting into an 8th episode of how our towns came to have their names, how they came to be. Not just the towns in Johnston, but the surrounding towns as well. And really the title of all these podcast episodes are What a Tangle Web We Weave, and you're going to see that it ain't just the ones connected by the railroad, except when it is. And today we're going to start a story about a man named John Marshall Wilson. He's from Warren County, North Carolina, and he needed a restart. Now, lots of people needed restarts after the American Civil War. I mean, everything had changed for better and for worse in the aftermath of this war. And like all major changes in society throughout history, it's always the people on the margins of social groups that experience the most changes. Mr. Wilson's one of those. And sort of like Washington Duke of a previous episode, he needed new opportunities. Now, likely following the Lewisburg to Smithfield Road, which is today Buffalo Road, he made his way from Warren County, North Carolina, close to the Virginia border, to a spot along the Neuse River around 1868. Now, it's a little downstream on the Neuse from where Hinton's Quarter settlement was. It was upriver from Smithfield and subsequently Princeton and Goldsboro. Now, Mr. Wilson helped, and followed by others, put in a couple of large mills, taking advantage of the power of the flowing Neuse River. Now, in particular, the mills that he set up was a grist mill for grain, probably more likely corn than anything else, and a sawmill. We have another grist mill that's still in operation in Johnston County called Atkinson Mill. I can't imagine this is all that much different. And there was also a cotton gin was going to show up as well. Now, with those services, these mills would come to be a new center of activity for the surrounding area. Remember, most of the commercial or industrial transportation was powered by walking horses pulling carts. So it's not like you can pull 60 miles in a day. So farmers may take their corn to get ground to make cornmeal, or lumber to be turned into planks for a project, maybe like a barn, or their raw cotton to get turned into something you can make fabric out of. It also did help that the train connecting Clayton to Selma happened to come through. And maybe Mr. John Marshall Wilson, like some residents of Kenly or Benson, saw a much more grandiose version of what this town, this community that will later be called Wilson's Mills, was going to be. Maybe he had an idea what it could be, but it never came to be. If he did, the community was in the unfortunate position of being between these two railroad hubs of Clayton and Selma. And there isn't just but so much money to go around. So it didn't really grow as quickly as its municipal-minded neighbors, and it remained small. Now, unlike Benson, which received its charter within a decade of initial settlement, Wilson's Mills didn't really get it big enough, or ambitious enough maybe, to get a charter for 60 years. They finally got one, and they became a real town all of a sudden in 1927. But it was known as a community for years before then. I mean, it was in the February 1910 edition of the Smithfield Herald. I mean, in between ads for mules and buggies for sale by Alonzo Parrish of Benson, and on the other side, Simmons Liver Regulator for sale at Vicks. There's a full-page article about the necessity of taxes to pay for county schools. Now, Wilson's Mills, the article says, has always understood and has always been willing to financially provide for public education. While the town may have been active, its government was not, though. So much that its charter to exist surrendered. They surrendered it, or it was revoked, depending on your point of view, but it lost its charter in either case in 1971. And before it, what that means is that the town of Wilson's Mills have fallen into such inactivity on a governmental level that the town literally ceased to exist. I do not hardly know of that many towns. I can't think of many that existed and then didn't. Wilson's Mills carries that. And so Wilson's Mills as a town literally died in 1971 after decades of no elections at all. They didn't have enough people to actually run the town. And since it was considered an inactive municipality, Wilson's Mills, which was born, died. But then, in 1995, Wilson's Mills is reborn. Now, whether it's a phoenix or a zombie, I really can't tell, but it certainly appears as if it's more like a phoenix because population growth was coming. And population growth actually did happen. In fact, we see the increasing number of residents to 2,676 by 2017, which itself was an increase of 103% off of 2000. Like much of Johnston, though, there seems to be two Wilson's Mills, economically speaking. And there's a town of Wilson's Mills, but it's sort of like it's, economically speaking, two different towns. Like Wilson's Mills in the northwest corner, if you look at census data, has an average income of $68,000 a year. And it goes from lower to higher in that average if you go east to west, towards Clayton. In the west towards Clayton, Wilson's Mills has the higher income, and you go further east to the old Wilson's Mills, and it goes a lot lower. In fact, when we go to old Wilson's Mills and close to the river in the east, we see another section, a medium income of $44,000 a year, a good $24,000 less on average, and also double the property rate and 1/3 the population. So, or property value. So what we're seeing here in the northwestern corner of Wilson's Mills is new Wilson's Mills, people that have moved in the last 20 or 30 years. Not everybody, but a lot. And old Wilson's Mills doesn't seem to be keeping up with it. Again, this is like a lot of Johnston. And so Wilson's Mills continues to grow. Now, I'll tell you somebody who has not grown. There's a tiny town called Jerome in Johnston County. It has not seen anything like that since it was originally chartered in 1899. Like Wilson's Mills, the coming of the railroad did little more than really establish a depot. But like early Wilson's Mills, it was also between two larger settlements of Kenly and Selma, but Selma was likely the reason for its non-growth. There's no need to actually get out at the Jerome depot and shop in Jerome when Selma was so close, so therefore nobody did. Just stay on the train and wait for the next stop. In fact, it was Jerome in Johnston County was hard to locate, even if you're looking for it. Perhaps part of the problem was that there was already another town in North Carolina called Jerome in Bladen County, so the Postal Service had difficulty delivering the mail, kind of like the two Dukes of a previous episode. Now, both the Dukes, in that case, had a significant population that a name change was needed as soon as possible. This was not the case for Johnston's town of Jerome. It was still necessary, don't get me wrong, but it really wasn't an emergency, so his name was not changed until 6 years later. And it didn't really matter that much, and town leaders sort of knew it. So they, understanding that it was never going to be a very large city, decided to take advantage of that smallness, and they renamed it Micro. And the name pretty well fit then and still does today. And that will do it for this episode of JoCo Yo. Had a fun time, and coming up next are two other towns, as we're going to see. One that's pretty old and one that's pretty new, but also sort of old, and really, really weird circumstances for how both those towns came to be. And we'll take care of that next time. So thanks for listening, and the last shoe like real towns coming up. Later.